We're going to get started. We're going to get started with praises, prayer requests, and all of that. I have a bulletin here. So I'm gonna pick on my good buddy Quentin here. I feel so off center right now, but yet I am centered to the camera. And so, yeah, he says I'm pulling the Pastor Carl. So Carl's probably gonna be. Well, he's not watching this because we don't live stream the prayer requests. But so now, if you want to say any joke you want about Pastor Carl, now is the time. No. I need to make that joke again when the camera's rolling. But welcome this morning. How's everybody? Good. Honestly? Good? Okay. Everyone's first default answer is good. So got to ask again to clarify. All right. Well, let's get started with some praises and prayer requests. First, any updates to anything that's currently on the prayer request list? Any updates? All right. Chrissy, tell me when I am live. I am live. Hi. I'm live this morning. Well, good morning. We are continuing our study in the book of Genesis. We're just about wrapping that up. We are going to, really this is the last focus specifically on specific verses and stories, narratives in the book of Genesis. And then after Thanksgiving, we have kind of like a transitional study before we get into Exodus and beyond here as we kind of study our way through the Bible. And we're in the life of Joseph. But I want to handle it a little differently than even the guide kind of tells us to this morning. Because Joseph is one of the most unique and interesting stories in the Bible. It has been said that there may be as many as 100 possible references to Jesus in the life of Jesus just within the story of Joseph. Now, they say as many as 100 because some people debate whether this is a reference or that's a reference or whatever. We'll talk about a few of them this morning, but I want to set up the story before we get into the lesson. So, many weeks ago, we started in Genesis, right? And we started focusing at the fall. We talked about creation, and then we had the fall of man. Okay, so in the biblical narrative and the story of the Bible, okay, you have God's created world and the human beings that He created to help Him rule in His world, right? And to have dominion over cultivating the world and keeping the world. And as we know from the story of Adam and Eve, that didn't go so well. Right, we saw the fall of mankind, right, and we saw how that's permeated even today, right, and we'll get to this in a second as we shared various stories of grief and hurt this morning as part of prayer requests. But what we'll see is that the biblical narrative, the biblical story, is all about getting back to what it was before the fall. So in the fall, we had Adam and Eve's failure. We had cast out of the garden. But in Genesis 3:15, there's a very specific promise that God makes, and it's often referred to as the first prophecy of Jesus, and I believe that to be true. But it's so much deeper than that. It's actually the setup for the rest of the story of the Bible. In Genesis 3:15, if you have there, you can turn. But I'm just going to summarize it real quickly. God tells the serpent, the snake, who we often refer to as Satan, right? He tells him, okay, I am going to bring the seed of the woman against you, and you are going to strike his heel, and he's going to crush your head. Right? And so there's this idea that the snake, the enemy, has helped bring evil into this world, and God is telling the enemy, telling evil, I'm going to crush you, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to bring a snake crusher. And the rest of the Bible, every bit of it, is either looking for that snake crusher. Who is he going to be? What is he going to do? When is he going to come? What's it going to look like? Or, which as Christians, it's our belief that Jesus is that snake crusher. He is that fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. The rest after Jesus is looking back on what this snake crusher accomplished, what Jesus accomplished. Okay, but that is the biblical story. Okay, and sometimes we get into these paradigms, these thoughts of what the Bible is, right? And we may miss out that it's actually the greatest story ever told. Right, because it's a true story. Right, everyone loves a good fairy tale. Right? I read way too many fairy tale related books to my kids, right? And for the most part, especially for young children, they have a great ending, right? But what makes it so awesome and so magical within the Bible is that it's a true narrative. Okay? It's a story of God truly bringing redemption to His world that He created, right, through Jesus. And that's important as it applies to the life of Joseph because of this. In Genesis 3:15, we have that promise. And for the rest of Scripture, every story we see, every hero, okay, I use that in quotations because I'll explain in a second. Every hero that steps up, we think, or the readers, the ancient readers of the Bible, and us as modern day readers, may look at that and go, is he the snake crusher? Did she do it? Is she the one? Is he the one who's going to do this? And we see that in the book of Genesis, right? We see shortly after the fall, things spiral, and God is going to start over, and he raises up Noah. Maybe Noah, he is the one, he's starting over. He's the new Adam. He is going to be the snake crusher. But he isn't. Right? He fails. We see Abraham raised up. He fails. We see Isaac raised up. He fails. We see Jacob raised up. He fails. And now we're introduced to Joseph. And Joseph is one of the cleaner examples of, if we're going to follow anyone in Scripture other than Jesus, which I wouldn't recommend necessarily, but if there's any picture of morality we can look at, it's probably the life of Joseph, a very moral person when you compare him to many of our other biblical heroes. Okay? But when we get to the book of Joseph, we're still looking, or the book of Joseph, the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis, we are still looking for who is going to be that one. Now, we know today that Joseph still was not that snake crusher. But what I want you to see as we go through the story of Joseph is all the examples in the life of Joseph that point to who that snake crusher would be, who the defeater of evil is going to be, who the defeater of the enemy is going to be. You're going to see a lot of symbolism to Jesus here. Okay? And we're also going to learn some principles and some things that are in the guide that we want to look at as well. But we get to the life of Joseph, and Joseph is the son of whom? Anybody? Huh? Jacob. Yes, he's the son of Jacob. So we left Jacob's story last week. We saw how he went from world's greatest con artist to a man now who walks and leads with a limp. Right, who wrestled with God, met God face to face, and there's all kinds of lessons you can teach just out of that section of Scripture. But now we have Jacob. Jacob has a family. Okay, he has a large number of sons. The sons become representative later on as the tribes of Israel. Okay, Jacob's name is changed to Israel. And one of those sons, the youngest of which at the time, is a young man named Joseph. And though Jacob had left a lot of his struggles and things behind, he was not a perfect human being. And one of his faults was favoritism. And he loved Joseph more than his other sons. We know the story of the multicolored coat, and that's probably what I'm sure the young kids will focus on today. It's a great story. But because of that, jealousy creeps into the family. Jealousy is an evil thing. It's an understandable thing, right? But wickedness can come from it, and that's what happens in the story of Joseph. His brothers decided they're done with him. They're tired of being second fiddle to the youngest. Joseph keeps bringing up these dreams that he's having that puts him in a position of power over them. And I must say, as I read the story, I do get a little hint of a braggadocious nature behind Joseph, maybe just a little bit, And he finally they decide they're going to get rid of him, and they don't want to kill him, and so they sell him into slavery. Not the first time, by the way, this has happened in Genesis, and they sell Joseph into slavery. He gets taken to Egypt. Okay, and the first place he ends up is in. We know the story of Potiphar and Potiphar's wife and that incident. And as that unfolds, he gets falsely accused. Okay, of crimes he did not commit. He gets thrown in prison, and that's where we're going to kind of pick up this. Today. If you would, go to Genesis 39, 21 through 23 is where we're going to read first. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. And so we look at this point, and you can see these verses are making an argument that God is with Joseph and extending favor to Joseph, kindness to Joseph, and blessing Joseph. And it sounds good on the surface. It's like, oh yeah, he's in charge of all this. He was doing good and all this. But let's keep in mind, where is Joseph right now? Prison. How many of us would feel like God favored us if we're sitting in prison? Hard to feel that way, if we're honest. So as I read this story, I find it interesting that God's favor may not look like we think it ought to look. It may not look like blessings and pay raises and perfect health and the perfect relationships and perfect families. Joseph had lost his family at this point. His family had betrayed him at this point. He was falsely accused. He was in prison. None of these scenarios to me scream favor. But yet, the biblical story tells us that the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. The warden didn't even bother with anything under Joseph's authority. He's like, you're just head prisoner. Can you imagine that today? I went to university at Sam Houston State. And it's in Huntsville, Texas, and Huntsville is well known for two things, a university and a prison. Sometimes I think they're two of the same, one and the same. But a university and a prison, right? Yeah, I can't imagine someone on the other side of the walls unit, if anyone knows who that is, that's the really scary place there in Huntsville. They have multiple facilities, but that's the one you really don't want to be in. I can't imagine the warden walking up to his most well-behaved prisoner and being like, hey, I got enough facilities to look over. I'm putting you in charge of this one. Doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Doesn't make a lot of sense. But yet we see that here in this story. And the picture I want to paint here is that we have an idea of what God's favor looks like. I can tell you that if I'm Joseph, God's favor does not look like being sold into slavery, being falsely accused, and being in prison. And it says, during this time, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. The point is that God is faithful to be present with his people, even in the midst of adversity. And I have to tell you, sometimes that's hard to believe. It's true, but it's hard to believe. This morning we had prayer request praises, and I won't get into all of them. I know we're on the live stream, but I'm sure those at home as well have many things that they have prayer requests about also. Can we be honest for a second? If you don't have to be, I will be for you. Life's tough. I sat at a dinner table last night, not only discussing, but also just in my own head going, God, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because I'm not sure I like it. I'm not sure I do. But here's the thing. I'm not God. I thought about the story of Job a little bit. Actually, I talked about it with some friends on Saturday, and just thought about it again a bit this morning. We love to tell the story of Job, from how blameless he was and how wrong his friends were, but we forget the fact that God comes and tells Job, hey, where were you, dude? Where were you when I created the world? Where were you when I did these things? And sometimes I feel a bit like Job in the sense of, God, what are you doing? I don't get it. I don't understand it. But what this story helps me remember is that God's idea of favor and kindness and my ideas of favor and kindness may not be aligned. That God may be with me amidst the adversity, not in spite of the adversity. Meaning that if there's an adversity, then God's not with me. And if life is good, then God is with me. Has anyone ever operated that way in their life? Yeah. Like 31 years of it here. I felt like whenever things were good in my life, God was pleased with me. And when things were not good in my life, God was unhappy. I was in sin. I was in rebellion or something. Something must be off. Or maybe I'm just not trying hard enough to be spiritual. Joseph, in this case, had done nothing wrong. At most, he was a little braggadocious about having some dreams that God himself gave him. And that's a little bit of interpretation on my part. But yet, he's in these horrific situations, and yet the Bible is recording these blessings in the midst of it. As we talk about this time of year and the prayer requests and such that came up, there's challenges, right? Right? Yeah. Some of you here this morning are grieving. You're grieving the loss of a loved one, the potential loss of a loved one. You're grieving our first holiday without him. What I don't want us to do is not feel that this morning. Feel that this morning. Understand it, because we often, especially, this is just me being real, in our culture, this is kind of a cultural thing, sometimes we say, I can't let those emotions be there because the good Christian in me can't say, God, this is hard. I can show you book after book and prophet after prophet who looks back at God and goes, God, this is hard. Some of us are struggling with pain of our own actions. Pains of actions that were done against us. Some of us feel lost and don't know where to go. And in all of these situations, the point that I'm making this morning is that God is still with us in our adversity. I have to tell myself, I have to look myself in the mirror that He is still with me whenever I can't feel Him. Because I've gone through a season in my life, and I can tell you, full honesty this morning, that there are times today, not just a past prior time, there are times right now where I feel like God is not with me. And I think about the name Emmanuel, God with us, and I go, are you sure? Are you sure? But if we look closely, we can see blessings amidst adversity. I'm not going to make the claim this morning that we're going to be able to find out the reason for why all bad things have happened to us. I wish I could. I wish I could say, hey, turn to page 39 in your Bibles, right? And we could all figure out exactly why this bad thing happened. Or why God allowed us to do this and not this. I wish I did. I'm sure Joseph wished he knew the plan here. Okay? And we'll see some of this plan come to fruition. We'll be able to see the story of why God did some of the things He did in the life of Joseph. And we're going to get into that just momentarily. But for us, we may not get that full picture. We might. Sometimes we can look back on a situation and be like, oh, that's what you were doing. And sometimes we can go through a lifetime and go, God, I don't know what you did there. But the purpose is this. The hope, key word, is that God is faithful to be present with us. He will hold your heart in your pain. He will grieve with you. He will celebrate with you. He will keep you from being lonely. He will keep you from being broken. Not feel these emotions. He won't keep you from feeling brokenness. He won't keep you from feeling lonely. But when you realize that God is actually with you, you can rest in that fact. It's hard. It's a challenge. You see, in the story of Joseph, the warden didn't bother anything under Joseph's authority. He gave him all kinds of authority. And we see what happens, right? We know the story. How does he get out of this prison? The baker and the cupbearer get thrown into prison. The Pharaoh's angry with them. And this innocent man is now in prison with these two potential crooks. And we know the story. One of the crooks is released, right? He wasn't a crook after all, right? And then the other is punished. It actually says that he's going to be hung and killed. And I only bring that up to, one, transition to how do we get out of this prison scenario to our next point. But two, just to give a little snippet of how the story of Joseph mirrors Jesus. Was Joseph innocent? Was Joseph innocent? Yes. And he was in this prison cell with two. One was honored and released. One paid the consequences. Jesus was hung on a cross between how many thieves? How many of those thieves went home to be in paradise with him? One. One paid for all of his sins with his life, right? Eternally speaking. Well, you see some imagery, and there's so many examples of that. We can get into how one of them was a baker and one is a cupbearer. And Jesus to his disciples, this is the bread, this is the wine. I mean, the story of the wine is the blood. The story of Joseph is just full of imagery pointing to Jesus. It's kind of insane how much stuff points forward. So I just wanted to drop that snippet in there to get your mind turning and thinking about all the ways that the Joseph story is to point us forward. Okay, so we transition now. The cupbearer, I believe, was it baker or the cupbearer? I'm got it backwards in my head, but one of the prisoners goes out, finally remembers Joseph after many times of forgetting him. Joseph gets pulled into the palace, interprets some dreams. Now he is one of the head honchos in Egypt, which, if you know anything about Egyptology and old history, ancient Egypt, I mean, to be over all the stuff that he was over, he was well taken care of. He was a very important person. Okay, he was in charge of all the storehouses. And if you don't know anything about storehouses were where they would gather up food and grain and store it for hard seasons and time. And then the government, no political joke here to be made. There's one to be made, but I won't make it. Would sell it back to the people during these hard times. Okay. So it had benefits to it, but also had some negative things. But was a very important part of culture at this time. And Joseph is in charge of all of this. And the famine that he predicted and the dreams of his Pharaoh come true. Okay? And so people have to come to Egypt to get their food. Okay? And some of those people end up being related to Joseph. So let's continue forward here. We're going to jump forward about 6 chapters, and we're going to be in Genesis 45. And so the lead up to this is that Jacob sends some of his sons, hey, we're going to starve to death. Go to the land of Goshen and talk to the guy in charge there, see if you can get some food, see what we can do, to buy some grain, to get some food to eat. And so he sends his sons, and Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize Joseph because he's probably all in Egyptian garb. He probably looks different. He was a boy when they sent him. He's a man now. And so a lot of, they just don't recognize him. He recognizes him. We see this battle back and forth in Joseph. He wrestles with forgiveness. Okay? We see him wrestling with, we even see him leave at one point and go crying in his bedroom and then coming back out. He's struggling a lot with, I believe, Henryism here, with everything that happened to him, the condition that his family is now in. Probably a lot of grief there. He's struggling with this forgiveness. But he finally gets to the point as the story goes back and forth, and we'll pick it up here in verse 4 of chapter 45. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. He says, "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Wow. Now, what I love about this is, again, what I said prior to this, we see Joseph struggle with this. They don't just encounter Joseph for the first time and him be like, "Oh, no, I'm Joseph, no big deal." We see him, he sends them back. He even puts a cup in there to make it look like they're stolen, so they have to be brought back. And there's this exchange back and forth. We see Joseph wrestle with this. We see the emotions of it as he struggles with forgiveness. But then he reaches a point here. He says, "Don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here." That's not necessarily an "I forgive you." Dude, it may be more powerful than one. He says, "Look, what you did, don't be upset about it. Don't be grieved about it. Because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Joseph understood, looking back, what all this stuff accomplished. He looked back at being sent away from his family, sold into slavery, falsely accused, imprisoned, to now being the very person standing between them and dying of hunger. And he says that God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. The hope that I have this morning is the things that we go through and that we endure in this world, that there's a plan like that. Sometimes it's hard to see. And I don't know that we're always going to get the explanation that we get here. It says in verse 6, "For the famine has been in the land for these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt." Things worked out pretty well for Joseph. And we actually see how there's the good and the bad of how these things happen, right? We see all the heartache and the struggle that Joseph had to go through. And then we see this blessing and fruit from it. But then we see that everyone coming to Goshen is also what sets up the Jewish people to be in slavery under the Egyptians. So sometimes you look at the grand picture and you're going, "God, what are you doing?" And this is what's very important, is that the story of Joseph is a stepstone in a greater story. This ties back into what I said at the very beginning. Okay? Remember we talked about the snake crusher? We talked about how the entire biblical story is either looking forward to him, telling us about him, or looking back. And each cog in this wheel got us closer to Jesus. Some of the cogs weren't all that pretty. Believe me, it gets uglier at times. It gets more beautiful at times too. Don't get me wrong. There's some beautiful things that God does between the story of Joseph and the coming of Jesus. But there's also a lot of hurt and hard things that happen. The book of Hebrews talks about the section that talks about faith. Right? We know Hebrews 11 and whatnot, but it's about 2 or 3 chapters section there that talks about faith and holding on to faith, and it uses what we call the Hall of Faith example. And if you actually look up those people, they're far from heroes. They did some great, amazing things, and they did some horrendous, horrible things. Right? But what he's praising them for in Hebrews is really interesting. They were promised something that often they did not see. Abraham never got to see that he would be the father of many nations. He got to see a son. He got to see an immediate. But he didn't get to see the fact that through him would come Jesus, who became the spiritual father of the Christian faith to many nations. Abraham didn't see that. Jacob did not see the nation of Israel under his name really form. We don't see that until after the Exodus. What I'm saying this morning is maybe you're going through adversity, maybe you're going through the struggle, maybe you're going through grief, heartache, hardship, trouble, and the holiday seasons may be exasperating that. Because let's not pretend that it's always, a Hallmark movie. Sorry to my Hallmark fans out there. Sometimes the holiday season's tough. Because it's a part of life, and life can be tough. But here's the thing. We're told in the story of Joseph that the adversity had a purpose. The frustrating part is sometimes we want to see that purpose, but what Hebrews tells us is sometimes we don't see the fulfillment of the promise. But we're a part of the story. Luckily for us, the end of that story has been written. I can't promise that life's not going to be tough for you as you walk out of here today. I'd be really amiss to do that because my life's not daisies and roses either. But we're all part of a story that's been written and already has a conclusion. It's a good conclusion. It's a beautiful conclusion. It's a redemptive conclusion. But just like every story in the Bible is not necessarily about the life of Joseph wasn't about Joseph. We can get into, is Joseph historical or not? I'm on the historical side personally. But the fact of the matter is the life of Joseph wasn't about Joseph. It wasn't about the hardships and things that he went through. It was about pointing to Jesus. Our lives are no different than Joseph's. He was pointing forward to the cross with his life, even when he didn't know it. And we are pointing back at it. So if there's anything in this life, any way that we can know that God is still present, still faithful, still with us in adversity, still compels us to forgive those that have hurt us, to seek forgiveness for the wrongs that we've done, to just do amazing things in the life of his people, despite all the stuff that happens, that points to Jesus. That points to Jesus. Because in the end, God is faithful to bring good even from evil. Again, sometimes I wonder, God, are you sure? Are you sure that you're faithful to do that? But we're told that he is, that God is faithful to bring good even from evil. We're going to end right here. I'm running out of time. Verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, if Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the suffering we caused him. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before he died, your father gave a command. Say this to Joseph, please forgive your brothers' transgression and their sin and the suffering they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when their message came to him. His brothers also came to him, bowed down before him, and said, we are your slaves. This is key. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children. He comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Man. You planned evil against me, and God planned it for good to bring about a present result. I can't tell you what the present result will be in your story. I don't know what the present result is in mine. But I do know this, that the preservation of that particular family eventually culminated in Jesus. Okay? He preserved a family to bring Jesus, to fulfill his own promise to bring Jesus. All I can tell you is that the present result, in some way, somehow, some form, leads to Jesus. Because everything leads to Jesus. Our story isn't about us. His story, Joseph's story, was not about him. It was about Jesus. So as we move forward this morning, some of us look, head nods, and some of you are like shell-shocked. But as we leave here this morning, let's understand, I want to say 4 things. 3 of them are points we've just discussed, but four things. One is let's not pretend life isn't difficult. Because that's what we do when we come to church sometimes. We pretend that life is not difficult. We pretend we're not grieving, we're not broken, we're not sinful, we're not addicted, we're not hurt, we're not upset, we're not lost, confused, angry. Let's drop that mask right now. That way, when we admit our adversities, we acknowledge our hardship, our grief, our pain, we can see how God is faithful to be present in those moments. Sometimes he's faithful to be present by just giving us other brothers and sisters to be with us in it. Smartest thing Job's friends ever did was sit there and be quiet. Maybe maybe we can encounter a situation where we can forgive something that is unforgivable. Or we can seek forgiveness and drop our pride. And maybe we can realize that though we don't know necessarily how the outcome of the story will be, we can understand that it's going to point to Jesus. And really, as hard as it is for even me to grasp that, that's kind of the point of everything. Does it point to Jesus? What are y'all's thoughts? Questions, comments before I wrap up, or Bill pulls me off stage. Any questions or comments? Concerns? Complaints? Whatever. Okay. Let me close this in prayer. Thank you to those who put up with me on live stream as well. I got to get better at looking at the camera more. It's been a while, remember, the story of Joseph is not merely about what little moral trinket we could pull out of it. It's so much deeper than that. It's a real example of life. Hardship, adversity, false accusations, broken families, forgiveness, grace, redemption. Guys, that's our stories. Surely mine. Let's close in prayer. Father God, thank you for this day. Thank you for all that you do. God, I pray that you would be known to us. Father, that if possible, you would reveal the present reality of how that hardship that we're enduring, how it's being benefited, how good is coming from it. God, if you could show us that, if you could reveal that to us, God, I pray that you would do so. But God, in the meantime, let us know that you're present with us in that adversity. As we wait for that answer, please let us feel your presence. Let us feel that presence as we sit with you. And you sit with us in our grief and our pain and our brokenheartedness and our shame and our guilt or whatever, our anger, our emotions. God, that you would sit with us in our adversity, that whatever challenge lay before us, that at the very least we know we're not alone. God, help us to have the gratitude to see the kindness when we don't feel like there's any kindness around us. Help us to see blessings that maybe we have overlooked. And help us to develop that gratitude. Help us to let go of the wrongs done against us and to drop the pride convincing us that we have nothing to be forgiven from. God, all in all, I pray for CCBC, for those on live stream and those here in person, that the church can move to a more communal way of operating together, that we can share each other's burdens and that we can be your representation of breathing life into other people amidst their adversity and amidst ours. We ask all this in your name. Amen.